Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the docking procedure. Chris Hadfield is one of the best known astronauts of all time, and he had quite a harrowing story on his first space flight. During this flight, he and his fellow astronauts had the pleasure of somehow navigating a £250,000 shuttle towards a target on the Mir space station that was about the size of a coffee cup. Yeah, the most tense few minutes of their lives, I can imagine. Chris's job was to watch and communicate the speed and range information to the pilot, which is a super important job, obviously, because it's such a precise thing. There's a time window, they have to be traveling at just the right speed, and they need to be accurate. Chris explained, quote, "If you hit Mir just a little too soft, then the spring mechanisms would bounce you off." He went on to say, quote, "If you hit Mir just a little too hard, then you would break Mir in half and kill the 3 people on board. So you've got to hit it exactly right." Yeah, definitely high stakes at this point. So when the crew is about 30 feet away, their 2 sensors start telling them completely different things. One said 32 feet and the other said 20 feet. Chris said, quote, "They're either both wrong or one of them is completely wrong. Now, what do? There's nobody to ask. If the crew on board the flight deck of the shuttle don't solve this problem in the next 30 seconds, then the whole flight is bust and done." Instead of panicking, however, Chris explained that he just went, quote, "back to basics." This insanely intelligent person knew the dimensions of the docking module, so he used his thumb to help him sort of eyeball the distance through a window. I mean, that alone is just wild. Apparently this helped him to figure out that they were 21 feet away, not 32. He used his stopwatch to figure out the math of how fast they were going and when the thrusters should be fired, and thankfully, he was spot on. Chris finished the story by saying, quote, "It wasn't for a few minutes before one of us looked around and said, 'Hey, we did it, we're actually here.' That was a big relief of emotion on board." Yeah, I can imagine. In our number 9 spot today, we have the gas leak. In July of 1975, the Apollo-Soyuz test project took place, which was a historic moment for both space travel as well as just for politics. This was the first joint spaceflight between the United States and the Soviet Union, and it marked the end of the space race. And while it started off extremely smoothly and was going well, this flight soon became known for an entirely different reason. On return, the 2 spacecrafts, the American one holding 3 astronauts and the Soviet one holding 2 cosmonauts, met in orbit around the Earth and docked to each other. Here the group began exchanging information, they were speaking each other's language to make communication easier, and also just as a sign of respect. Things were going amazingly considering the recent history. After 44 hours together they parted, and after a few more days they were on their descents back to Earth. During re-entry, however, a malfunction with the reaction control system, which is the system that controls the altitude, this malfunction ended up causing highly poisonous nitrogen tetroxide to enter the cabin where the American astronauts were. Thankfully, once this spacecraft landed, the cabin becomes ventilated, which gave them time to be rescued without being fatally injured. The astronauts on board were rushed to the hospital and were found to have developed a form of pneumonia that is caused from chemicals, but within weeks they all recovered and lived to tell the tale of this historic spaceflight. In our number 8 spot today, we have Mir EO-23. This is the name of a mission that was part of the Shuttle Mir space program, which was a, quote, "collaborative 11-mission space program between Russia and the United States that involved American space shuttles visiting the Russian space station Mir, Russian cosmonauts flying on the shuttle, and an American astronaut flying aboard a Soyuz spacecraft to engage in long-duration expeditions aboard Mir. During this mission, on February 23, 1997, a backup solid fuel oxygen canister ended up catching fire. This fire was in one module, but it quickly began to spew molten metal, and the crew on board was concerned that it could melt through the hull of the space station. Smoke began to fill the station, and the crew were forced to use respirators to continue breathing, but of course when it rains it pours, and some of the respirators were faulty and didn't supply oxygen. After burning for 14 minutes and the crew using up 3 fire extinguishers, the fire was thankfully put out. The smoke, however, remained thick for another 45 minutes. This was probably one of the most terrifying things that the crew went through, but this certainly was not the end of the road of struggles for these guys. Let me know down below in the comments if you want a part 2 of this video, and maybe we can cover the rest of what went wrong on this mission. In our number 7 spot today, we have Apollo 13. Definitely one of the most well-known space missions ever. Apollo 13 is famous for all of the most terrifying reasons. This mission was the 7th crewed mission in the Apollo space program, and it was the 3rd that was meant to land on the moon. The spacecraft launched on April 11, 1970, but the mission to land on the moon was quickly aborted 2 days into the flight after an oxygen tank in the service module failed. A quote, routine stir of an oxygen tank ignited damaged wire insulation inside it, causing an explosion that vented the contents of both the service module's oxygen tanks to space. Without this oxygen that's needed for breathing and for generating electric power, the service module's propulsion as well as their life support systems were just unable to operate. This meant that the command module systems had to be shut down in order to conserve the resources it had left for re-entry. This meant that the crew had to transfer to the lunar module as a sort of lifeboat. The lunar module was only designed to support 2 men on the moon's surface for 2 days, so Mission Control had to create new procedures so that it could support 3 men for 4 days. The crew was in for some of the most difficult times while the ground crew worked to help bring them home alive. Safe to say everyone was as stressed out as they could possibly be. Thankfully, the crew on board the ship were returned to Earth safely, and this story, although horrifying, did wonders to restore public interest in the Apollo program. This story is one of the most famous space stories ever, thanks to the several dramatizations made about it. In our number 6 spot today, we have the STS-27 disaster. During the launch of STS-27, which took place in 1988, debris from the right solid rocket booster struck the underside of the craft, which ended up severely damaging over 700 tiles on the outside of the craft, as well as taking off one tile completely. It might not seem like a lot, but every little thing matters when you're doing something like going to space. So it's important to note that this mission was classified because of the fact that there was a surveillance satellite being launched along with it. Because of this, things had to be done a little differently, so when the crew on board sent photos of the damage back to the ground, the photos were encrypted and they were extremely low quality. Mission Control deemed the damage to be just light and shadows and told the crew to continue, much to their dismay. Once landed, it became clear that Atlantis was the single most damaged shuttle that was thankfully able to successfully land. The survival of the crew came down to basically happenstance, which is just terrifying. This was only the second mission after the disaster of the Challenger, so should this one have gone fatal, we likely wouldn't have seen the continuation of the program. In our number 5 spot today, we have the organic object. Leland Melvin is an American engineer and retired NASA astronaut who served on board the space shuttle Atlantis as a mission specialist. He is an incredibly brilliant man with an incredible resume, and that is exactly why this story is so unnerving. He claimed that while on a space mission as he was orbiting Earth, which for the record, how cool would it be able to tell a story like that? You're just orbiting Earth. While he was on this mission, he saw a quote alien-like organic object. NASA disputed his claims and said that what he saw was just ice, but I feel like I trust the person who actually saw it with their own eyes. Leland went on to write that whatever he saw was quote translucent, curved, organic looking. I have no explanations to offer, but I will say it certainly is interesting and a little bit terrifying. In our number 4 spot today, we have the space snake. Dr. Franklin Story Musgrave is an American physician and retired NASA astronaut, and considering how credible he tends to be, despite the absurdities of this story, it makes it hard to pass off as a lie so easily. While he was in space, he claims that he saw something that I don't wish upon anyone, a sort of space snake. He said that he saw an 8-foot-long white snake floating through space. I don't even know what I would do. Probably cry, call Houston, I'm not sure. There are many people who think that this was simply just a detached hose from the spaceship, but Dr. Musgrave remains adamant on what he saw, and to be completely honest, I kinda believe him. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. I mean, I don't know what happens in space, but I find it hard to believe that this person, who would likely be familiar with the parts of a spacecraft, mistook a hose for a snake. In our number 3 spot today, we have the lights. Leroy Chiao was the commander of the ISS in 2005, and this is exactly when this strange sighting occurred. It is said that he wasn't the only one who witnessed this though, as it is said that the entire crew was there to see this unexplainable occurrence along with him. Basically, they saw a strange set of lights while up in space. He went on to describe the lights and said that they were in the formation of an upside down V, and that they ended up stumbling upon this bizarre situation after the formation flew past them. I'm just gonna say it, we're all thinking it, it sounds a lot like aliens. I just don't have any other possible explanations, and you're telling me that the whole crew saw it? I swear, nothing will convince me more of aliens than an astronaut's first-hand account. In our number 2 spot today we have glowing green. Gordon Cooper is a well-known astronaut after having flown the Mercury 9 and the Gemini 5, and in fact he was the last American to spend time in space alone. But despite all these exciting accolades, I want to take you to May 15th, 1963. Here he was sent off to space in a Mercury capsule for a 22-orbit journey around the Earth, and while on this journey he saw something very unsettling, a glowing green object that would approach his capsule. During his final orbit, he did tell the tracking station of this object that was quickly approaching his capsule, and they were able to pick up this UFO on their radar, but once Cooper landed, reporters were told that he was not allowed to answer questions regarding this UFO. It's even more interesting considering how Gordon has been a vocal and firm believer in UFOs, so I ask, what do you guys think it was? In our number 1 spot today we have space music. After 4 days of space travel in 1969, the Apollo 10 astronauts, Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan, and John Young, were on the far side of the moon. We were full of curiosity over what the other side could possibly be containing, but it wasn't necessarily the discovery people were expecting. While the astronauts were taking photographs and experiencing this new to humans area, they began to hear some otherworldly music coming from their headsets, and this continued for 1 full hour. Gene is said to have exclaimed, "Boy, that sure is weird music, we're gonna have to find out about that," while John replied, "Nobody will believe us." For decades this space music was left a complete mystery until just recently when an explanation was put forward. It is being claimed that perhaps this sound emanated from radio interference between spacecrafts. While this is a fairly reasonable explanation, not everyone is exactly convinced. Starting off in our number 10 spot we have life on Mars. This is a legend that's been around for quite some time, especially since the 1970s when the Viking 1 and 2 were launched. This legend basically suggests that there is, or at least was, alien life on Mars, and that NASA knows about it, but they are just keeping the little secret to themselves. Like all space conspiracies, this legend ranges from some pretty out there but still based in reality ideas, all the way to absolutely absurd tinfoil hat vibes. What I mean is that some believe this is true because they claim to see alien fossils in the photos of the surface of Mars that we have. There are others who think that maybe NASA just isn't searching for signs of alien life at all. And then there are those who think that Mars is actually fully inhabited by like half alien, half human creatures and NASA's just hiding that from us. I'll let you decide on this one. In our number 9 spot today we have X-37B. So I guess this one is more like a NASA mystery rather than an urban legend, but basically they sent a space shuttle up, but no one knows exactly what it's for. Throughout the last few years, an X-37B spacecraft has gone on a number of different missions up into the orbit of Earth, but no one is willing to spill the beans on what these missions are aimed at doing. Of course, like with any legend, the theories are abound. Some people believe the purpose of these missions is to test out new technology. Very reasonable, but there are others out there who think that these missions are meant to destroy different satellites, or that this craft is really some kind of space weapon, but only time will tell if all of the secrets of the craft ever get declassified. In our number 8 spot today we have the Livestream. This is an urban legend that stems from an ISS livestream a few years ago. Back in 2016, alien enthusiasts and UFO watchers noticed as they watched a livestream that was being broadcast from the ISS two objects that seemed to be entering Earth's atmosphere. These objects were unidentified and they looked like they were tumbling toward Earth, so many people took this image to be UFOs. To only add more fuel to the fire shortly after these objects could be seen, the live stream was cut off abruptly. NASA swears that this was merely just a coincidence, and while that is possible, not everyone is convinced that's the case. In our number 7 spot today we have changes. Okay, other than those who have been to space, who's to say what experiencing something like that would do to just your entire outlook on life, and especially your mental health. I mean, on one hand it's gotta be one of the most incredible experiences, but on the other side it would be terrifying and probably kind of lonely. Spending weeks and sometimes even months in the vast darkness of space, as amazing as it sounds, it likely isn't for the faint of heart. That is exactly why this NASA legend suggests that many of the astronauts who have been to space have returned with changes in their behavior, and apparently NASA has done everything everything they can to deny this. It is said that there is a psychologist who has worked with many NASA employees who actually went on to criticize the agency for denying that these behavioral changes existed, and she even suggested that they be looked into and researched more because she believes it goes deeper than any of us may even realize. This would include more in-depth screening both before and after the missions. This legend is likely to have developed in 2007 after former astronaut Lisa Nowak was arrested for harming someone, to which she pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. In our number 6 spot today we have the Mystery House. You may or may not have heard about the Mystery House that was seen on the moon in November of last year. This mysterious object was spotted by the U-2 rover, but at the time this rover was at such a distance it needed time to get there to check it out. Months later, when the rover arrived, it was released that it was in fact just a weird shaped rock, but not everyone is convinced, and legend has it this just may be a cover-up for what this mystery house really is. Of course, people believe that this mysterious object likely has some sort of alien or extraterrestrial origin, despite what researchers are saying. In our number 5 spot today we have space signals. It is no secret that NASA has been tracking and looking into a ton of mysterious radio signals referred to as fast radio bursts that have been detected in space. Some of these signals we have been able to find the source of, but some have been plaguing the minds of scientists everywhere since they were first discovered. Legend has it, however, that NASA knows exactly where these signals are coming from, and of course it's aliens, but they just don't want to tell us. What do you think? Do you think NASA would keep aliens a secret from us, or is this just some space conspiracy sort of stuff? Let us know down below in the comments. In our number 4 spot today we have black holes. Of course, black holes are one of the most terrifying and mysterious parts of space, and while we know they exist, we really don't know much else about them. Of course, people and researchers will try to get a closer glimpse at them and maybe even try and take matters into their own hands and attempt to recreate the conditions of a black hole right here on Earth. The world's largest particle accelerator, the Large Hadron Collider or LHC, which has been credited with proving the existence of the Higgs boson particle, is part of the source of another space legend, and that has to do with the idea that NASA is creating their own black hole. Some believe this project is intentional, while others just worry about it becoming a reality accidentally. It's true that if this were to happen it would be bad news, but luckily this probably isn't very likely and may not even be possible. In our number 3 spot today we have secrets. Of course, NASA knows a lot more than the average person would when it comes to the likely fate of our planet. I mean, they know a lot more about the planet than the average person, and tell me this, when was the last time you even looked through a telescope? It's just safe to say they are better briefed on all of the cosmic horrors that threaten our planet. We are definitely more well versed with the disasters that we may face here on the planet, but when it comes to threats that sit thousands of light years away, well, we definitely aren't the experts. That is the basis for this theory or legend that should NASA find out that we are facing some sort of humanity-destroying space threat, that they wouldn't even tell us. NASA would likely know about a life-altering asteroid collision long before it happened, but some people think that even if they had the time to warn us, they just wouldn't. And it doesn't even stop at the usual threat like an asteroid. This belief includes things like pieces of space junk, an alien invasion, the sun burning us alive. Really, as wild as you can get, people think NASA would just keep it all a secret. In our number 2 spot today we have preparations. On July 20th, 1969, President Nixon made a call that would rack up some astronomically large long-distance charges when he called the Apollo 11 astronauts who were, at the time, on the moon. He of course wanted to congratulate them on this incredible achievement, but as it turns out, he maybe wasn't all that confident that the mission was going to be successful. His former speechwriter let it slip that there was in fact an emergency broadcast script that had been written should the mission have gone south. The speech was later leaked, and it said, quote, "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery, but know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice." I know everyone's got to have a contingency plan, but if I was one of those astronauts, it would be a little bit chilling to have heard about the words that were prepared in the case that you were just being left out in space forever. In our number 1 spot today we have stuck. Recently, on a Space Legends myth list, we talked about the Fisher space pen, and today we are talking about how it relates to another NASA legend. Basically, Nixon almost did have to use that speech he had prepared, because following the historic moonwalk, Aldren and Armstrong discovered that a 1-inch engine arm circuit breaker switch had broken off the instrument panel. This was an integral part of getting the engine to ignite so that they would be able to make it back home, so rightfully so, they were pretty terrified. The broken switch was reported to Mission Control, but by the next morning they still didn't have a solution. Aldren explained that, quote, "After examining it more closely, I thought that if I could find something in the LM to push into the circuit, it might hold. But since it was electrical, I decided not to put my finger in or use anything that had metal on the end." This is where the legend comes in. People claimed that he used one of the Fisher space pens to help him fix this broken switch, but that isn't entirely true. It wasn't a Fisher pen, but he did use one that had a felt tip. Aldren said, quote, "I had a felt-tipped pen in the shoulder pocket of my suit that might do the job." He went on to explain, quote, "After moving the countdown procedure up by a couple of hours in case it didn't work, I inserted the pen into the small opening where the circuit breaker switch should have been and pushed it in. Sure enough, the circuit breaker held. We were going to get off the moon after all. To this day, I still have the broken circuit breaker switch and the felt-tipped pen I used to ignite our engines." If this didn't work, it is very likely that these astronauts would have been stuck on the moon. This was indeed a very serious problem that could have gone a much different way.
In our number 10 spot, we have an alien interaction. Have you ever come across someone that so clearly lied but they tried to cover it up with a joke? Or perhaps they were so clearly telling the truth and they decided to mask it as it's a joke. Well, that could very well be the case for astronaut Scott Kelly, except I'm not quite sure if he was masking the truth with his words. I'll let you decide. Apparently, Scott Kelly spent quite a lot of time on the International Space Station. He is known as the astronaut that has stayed the longest in the space station. Scott has apparently made a few UFO/alien jokes in his time that has raised some eyebrows. At one point, he was quoted as saying that aliens have it easier in space than we do. First off, that is not a joke. If he thinks that's a joke, I think we need to sign him up for a class at Second City. But second, excuse me sir, but what does that mean? Have you seen aliens in space seemingly live comfortably? Was he told to say that he was joking because he could have revealed a top secret if he elaborated? Possibly. If you're liking this video, don't forget to subscribe for good vibes and more content like this. In our number 9 spot, we have UFO footage. Here is some crazy footage that NASA has dismissed. It's so clear that there's something going on here, and the complete disregard for crazy footage like this truly makes you feel like, what else are they keeping from us? In 2020, Russian cosmonaut Ivan Wagner made a time-lapse video while orbiting space, and he claimed to have found something. Space guests, he called them. In his video, you see the curved edge of the Earth at night with a green swirl of the aura moving across the surface and several falling stars. It's such a cool video to see. Then about 9 seconds in, you see a fleet of 5 possible UFOs. He said that because it's in a time-lapse format, you can't measure how long they were there, but it was for about 50 seconds real time. This video is so nuts. I'm so happy that this astronaut decided to share this with the world. At least we know that some of them are on a quest for truth and are not keeping us from seeing crazy evidence. In our number 8 spot, we have new planets. Not too long ago, it was released to the public that a possible batch of Earth-sized planets were discovered, and apparently 3 of them could possibly support human life. Yeah, my mind is blown too. Some scientists are on board with the evidence and some are dismissing it, which makes it confusing to us little guys that don't know what's going on and really just want to know if aliens exist or not. Let's be real. We've been kept out of important discoveries before only to have seen evidence years later when they've been declassified. People believe that's what will happen in this case. Perhaps not only were these planets discovered, but possibly alien life as well. These planets have been called the TRAPPIST-1 planets, and the whole discovery just feels fishy to me, as if people are dismissing the evidence to cause confusion so that no one knows what's real and are distracted by the confusion. In our number 7 spot, we have the flat Earth theory. Many people believe that the spherical Earth is a lie and that NASA has been faking the whole thing. They believe that all of the photos of the globe are photoshopped for financial gain. I'm not sure I'm on board with this one, but let's discuss why people think this is a lie. It is believed that it would cost much less to fake a space program than to actually have one, and the funding that NASA gets goes to the people behind the sham. Whoa, imagine. NASA has thousands of employees though, so logically it would be pretty hard to fake it from that many people. Unless of course you had everyone work on projects that are top secret and they aren't allowed to tell their coworkers what they're working on. Like I said, not sure I'm fully on board with NASA lying about this one, but if this lie were proven to be real, there would probably be some kind of civil war, because I bet people would be furious. In our number 6 spot, we have the gray thing. Here we have another case of, is this astronaut a liar or is this a true story? This is a story told by an anonymous online user that claims to be an astronaut who once saw an alien in an underground US base. He claimed to have been traveling through a US base that he didn't want to name as there is only a number of people allowed in and he doesn't want to be tracked. At this base he saw a person that was gray, and he was definitely not from this planet. Obviously. When out in space, he had seen a fleet of aircraft that he knew were UFOs, but he didn't think we had any contact with them yet. It wasn't until that moment that he realized that not only do we have contact with them, but also the aliens are actually already living among us. Interesting. Well, there are so many quote-unquote whistleblowers that have mentioned gray people, so this story could be true. Some think it to be a lie, some don't. I think that there are only a handful of people that have gone to space, so it would be easy to find the culprit, and this would be a very risky move on their part. What do you think? In our number 5 spot, we have UFO in orbit. This story is crazy to me because 2 astronauts by the name of James Lovell and Frank Borman once claimed that they had seen a UFO, but NASA dismissed it. NASA claims that the story isn't true and it is clear that they have tried to bury it. They said that what these 2 men saw were just the booster rocket nearby, but they both said that what they saw was a fleet of UFOs and the booster in sight. It was not the booster according to them. They were UFOs and the booster. Look, personally, I don't see a reason for them to lie, other than maybe if they were hoping for a future book deal, but honestly, just the very fact that they have gone to space would automatically make them cool enough for a book deal, and I'm sure a publishing house would say yes. So I can't think of any reason why they would be motivated to lie, so I believe them. There's so much out there that we don't know yet. We might as well stay open and believe the actual people that went to space when they say that they've seen something. In our number 4 spot, we have enormous babies. There have been many reports from NASA employees of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin seeing aliens when they first arrived on the moon. They have said that this is a lie and that they never ever said anything about big babies, but a lot of people believe differently, as if they wouldn't have been bought off by someone who would want to keep it a secret, am I right? A former NASA employee by the name of Otto Binder unnamed radio hams with his own VHF receiving equipment bypassed NASA's broadcasting and picked up the following being said by Neil in response to NASA asking, "What's there, Apollo 11?" The response, "These babies are huge, sir. Enormous. Oh my god, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out there, lined up on the far side of the crater edge. They're on the moon watching us." Allegedly, off the record, the 2 astronauts did admit to many scientists that they indeed saw something. I could get on board and believe that they probably did see something and then proceeded to lie about it, but I doubt they would lie out of malicious greed if they did. It would have been probably due to following orders, let's be real. In our number 3 spot, we have, is the sun as big as we think? This is a theory I had never heard about before researching this video. Apparently there are people that believe that NASA astronauts have lied to us in regards to what they know about the sun. Again, such an odd thing to lie about, and also, what for? For what purpose? Why would they need to lie about this? But Anyways, the theory is that the sun is actually much closer and smaller than NASA has told us. A conspiracy theorist said this, quote, "Clear photographs of the sun used in textbooks are always produced with modern telescopes containing the necessary devices used to view the sun properly. The telescope manufacturers, along with the organizations which use the telescopes, those very organizations which propagate the moon hoax, have an interest in there being a sun, and so their evidence cannot be accepted as authentic." Huh. So it's believed that the telescopes have changed the look of the sun due to a financial interest? Yeah, they lost me. But who knows, perhaps what we know about the sun is a lie. That would suck, but I don't rule out anything these days. In our number 2 spot we have moon people. In November of 2021, China thought that they were on the precipice of making one of the world's biggest discoveries. Moon people. Actual aliens on the moon. But honestly, they were either lying to themselves and really wanted to believe it, or they are lying to all of us right now. Dun, dun, dun. Basically, the U-2 moon rover captured a mystery hut on the moon. But basically it was revealed in January 2022 that this hut was just a crater rim. But was it? Was it just a crater rim? Or was it actually aliens, but we the public have been told otherwise? If they really did make a mistake, it's pretty funny to think that they thought a crater rim was actually a hut for aliens. In our number 1 spot we have the Freemasons. Ever heard the theory that the government has been infiltrated by the elite with their own personal agendas? Well, some people believe that to be in the case of NASA. People believe that the oldest secret society has infiltrated NASA, and therefore it is possible that the information may be corrupted and previous/present astronauts may lie about their experiences in space. Where do people get this idea from? Well, allegedly Buzz Aldrin had connections to the Freemasons, and so did Edgar Mitchell of Apollo 14 and Don Izell of Apollo 7. Apparently James Irwin as well. Another theorist pointed out that NASA has symbols that are tied into the Freemasons. They pointed out that the United States is represented by the eagle, and so are the Freemasons, and the US was the first on the moon. All of this could be a stretch, or it could be connected. Whether all of this is a coincidence or not, who knows, but it sure makes you think.
Number 10. Al Warden. American test pilot, engineer, and NASA astronaut Alfred Merrill Warden. He was the module pilot for the Apollo 15 lunar mission back in 1971. Now after Apollo 15 reached lunar orbit, Warden spent 3 days alone in said module. Just space things, just journaling out some space thoughts, traveling the furthest out there from any other human ever. It's a lonely road, I'm betting. After Al returned, the crew and him became involved in a NASA controversy over postage stamps that they had taken to the moon. Yeah, it turns out you can't litter there as well. Can't litter here nor there. Littering's bad everywhere. That rhymed. Let's hit that thumbs up. I don't know. They were reprimanded by NASA and did not fly in space ever again because of postage stamps. Or was there something else involved? Warden remained at NASA until 1975, and then he entered the private sector. And then it gets a little weird. On a British television morning show, when Al Warden was asked about why we should return to the moon, he replied, "Survival of our species." That's always odd when an astronaut says that, huh? When asked about alien life existing out there, Al's response was to get books on the ancient Sumerians and see what they had to say about it. Do you feel like Al Warden saw some shit? I feel like Al Warden saw some shit. Number 9. Edgar Mitchell. US Navy officer, aviator, test pilot, engineer, all that good stuff, and most importantly, NASA astronaut. He was a lunar module pilot of Apollo 14 back in 1971, and he spent 9 hours working on the lunar surface. He was the 6th person to walk on the moon. He was walking while Warden was up there drifting in the currents of space, so that's a dream team right there. Mitchell publicly expressed his opinions that he was sure that the thousands of UFOs that he saw belonged to other planets. Again, thousands of UFOs that he saw in space. So I can't breathe. That's very scary. Dateline NBC conducted an interview with Mitchell in 1996 where he talked about meeting officials from 3 different countries who all claimed to have met extraterrestrials in person at some point. It's a lot of officials and a lot of meetings with a lot of weird handshakes, I bet. In 2004, he told the St. Petersburg Times that the US government was studying alien bodies. In 2008, Mitchell was interviewed and he claims that the Roswell crash was indeed real and that aliens have contacted humans several times, but the government's hidden the truth now for 60 years. Yeah, he sadly passed away in 2016, so we can't ask him any more questions. But do we believe? Do we? I kinda do. I don't know. James Webb? He definitely believes. Number 8, Chris Hadfield. Retired Canadian astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot, and musician. Oh, okay. In 1992, Chris Hadfield was accepted into the Canadian astronaut program. He first flew in space in 1995, and since then, he's seen tons of stuff up there, just zipping around apparently. He says he can't explain it, but he also isn't running with it. He says, quote, "To see something in the sky that you don't understand, and then to immediately conclude that it's an intelligent life form from another solar system is the height of foolishness and lack of logic." End quote. Also, end roast. Oh my god. However, he thinks that there could potentially be alien life, and that is in the clouds of Venus, or on the distant moons of one of our gas giants. That's his best guess, so honestly, yeah. Fair, more than fair. Number 7, James McDivitt. James McDivitt is an American test pilot, Air Force pilot, engineer, and NASA astronaut who flew in both the Gemini and Apollo programs. That's a fat resume right there. It's good God, nice. After graduating first in his class with a Bachelor of Science degree in aeronautical engineering, in 1962 McDivitt was selected by NASA for the Gemini 4 mission. And in 1965 he saw, filmed, and photographed an object, which apparently approached the Gemini 4 as they were orbiting Earth. Now this all happened right over Hawaii. Major James McDivitt describes this as a cylindrical object that was white with a long arm that stuck out on the side. The film was sent back to NASA and reviewed by some NASA film technicians, but once it was returned, it was not the same photo. This one was a photo of sun reflection on the window. Yeah, the old NASA swap. Gotcha. We got the secret one here, tucked away in that secret Vault app on our iPod Touch. That's where that photo is. Do we believe this? I don't know, I kinda do. In 1975, McDivitt said it was something he definitely couldn't identify. It looked like a beer can with a pencil sticking out of it, so party on, dude. 25 years of experience. What could you possibly seen? I don't know, now I'm questioning my existence. Number 6, Spaceman. Okay, we've all been photobombed before. It's a blessing in disguise, right? But when Jim Templeton took a photo of his daughter in an empty marsh long before Photoshop existed, it appears an astronaut photobombed this family moment. Now Jim assures us that nobody was around, which I believe, or else what a weird photo to take in an empty field, right? It's weird in all parties. Also, the fact that this man looks like he's from space makes it a bit more believable, makes it a bit more jarring to look at. What are we seeing right now? This is so creepy. Kodak, like, you know, the photo company Kodak, they got involved in the story. They confirmed this photo wasn't tampered with. Yeah, let's run everything by Kodak from now on, I guess. They're so confident. They're like, no, it's fake. I'm like, how do you know? Oh my god. Mr. Kodak, stop. Number 5, Black Knight satellite. Not to be confused with Martin Lawrence's Black Knight, although that's pretty historical and memorable in itself, but a little different. The Black Knight satellite is something that's been orbiting our planet for thousands of years, apparently. And we still question its existence and, you know, where it came from. Alien astronaut from the future trying to warn Earth? That's a good theory I read. Sure, why not? Let's lean into there. I buy it. This photo you've probably seen at one point or another. It was taken back in 1998 during an American mission to the International Space Station. Now during a spacewalk in 98, one of the thermal covers came loose and drifted away from the station. So could this be that cover? If so, what did it catch onto? And why does everybody want it to be an alien night so badly? These photos shared originally by NASA look a lot different than a solar sail. I'll happily admit, it looks like an alien. Number 4, the time traveler. Do you believe in time travel? If your answer is no, just go back to the beginning of this video and then, you know, there you go, you've done it. Fooled me somehow. If your answer is no, maybe this will change your mind. I don't know. It's a common theme in movies. You see it in Back to the Future, Looper, Avengers. Time travel plots are fun, but they're absolute obviously. But when we see a case like the Cape Scott story, we can't help but be intrigued a little, right? We want to believe just a bit. Could it be? Is it possible? This is an interesting photo. Let's talk about it. It comes from Ray Peterson's book, The Great Cape Scott Story. Now that book was from 1974, but the actual photo in it was taken over 100 years ago from our date right now. In this photo, we see this modern looking guy rocking shorts, messy morning surfer hair. He looks kind of cool. I don't know. The dude looks like Tony Stark. He looks casual as shit. He doesn't look like he's from that time period at all. Now many believe he's an astronaut or a time traveler who got stuck in time and just went with it, which is half hilarious but also half terrifying. That's not an early 1900s man. There's no chance. Don't they all have monocles and big big mustaches and walk with a cane? I don't know. I'm watching a lot of Peaky Blinders right now. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Number 3, Gordon Cooper. Leroy Gordon Cooper, Jr. He's an American aerospace engineer, test pilot, US Air Force pilot, you name it. And he's the youngest of the 7 original astronauts in Project Mercury, aka the first human space program of the United States. Not too shabby. In Cooper's autobiography, Leap of Faith, he recounts his experiences with the Air Force and NASA and a UFO conspiracy. We love those. Cooper claimed to have seen his first UFO while flying over Germany. Cooper also claimed that up until his death that the US was covering up many UFO operations. He said there were hundreds of reports made by his fellow pilots as well, and many of them coming from military pilots on radar. In his memoirs, Cooper wrote that he had seen unexplained aircraft many times throughout his career, and in 1978 he actually testified before the United Nations on the topic. Put your hand on a book for aliens? That's crazy. That's what now? Number 2, Buzz Aldrin. Yes, the astronaut who punches back. We love Buzz Aldrin. American astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot with a doctorate of science in astronautics. You lose this street fight every day, my friend. Mr. Aldrin performed 3 spacewalks in 1966, and of course in 1969, he did the Apollo 11 mission, where he and Neil Armstrong were the first 2 people ever to land on the moon. Now, Buzz said that he saw something out there. He's confident. Close enough to be observed, so, you know. Quote, I observed a light out the window that appeared to be moving alongside us. What could that be other than a spacecraft from another country or another world? It was either the rocket that had separated from us or the 4 panels that moved away when we extracted the lander, right? End quote. He asks us, I'm like, I don't know, I wasn't up there, man. No idea. I've seen Gravity, I have no idea what you're talking about. After he returned from his missions, he was convinced that he saw aliens while he was out there. He took a lie detector test after talking about this incident and he passed. So that's jarring. Buzz thinks that there's a monolith on Phobos, which is one of the moons that orbits Mars. It actually orbits it every 7 hours. Buzz thinks there's a monolith just sitting there. He says when people find out about that, they're gonna say, who put that there? Okay, great question. Who put this giant monolith there on that moon? Was it aliens? Future humans? Was it Buzz Aldrin? Who knows? And finally, number 1, Michael Collins. NASA veteran and the very first driver up there, Mr. Michael Collins, served as command module pilot on the historic Apollo 11 mission back in 1969. Now, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon for the first time, Collins was parking. He was just hanging up. He was feeding the meter, for lack of a better term, while everyone else was, hopping around. Mr. Collins stayed up there by himself in lunar orbit, waiting for the safe return of his crewmates. Just by himself. That's terrifying. The astronaut retired from NASA in 1970, and he spent his time answering questions on Twitter, because that's pretty fun. That's what some astronauts do, I guess, now. And some of these questions were really interesting. Are we alone? Hashtag Ask Michael Collins. He wrote in his book saying things like, quote, I am alone now, truly alone and absolutely isolated from any known life. Although I may feel like I am the same person, I also feel like I'm different from other people. I've been places and done things you simply would not believe. Collins circled the moon once every 2 hours, so what could he possibly have seen out there alone? Hey, what's scarier, walking on an unknown rock that apparently no one has ever visited, or flying all the way around it by yourself in the pitch black with no communications? I would say the latter, definitely the latter. I would not want to sit in the dark room. I can't even sit in my bedroom alone in the dark, let alone orbit a fucking moon. No way.
In our number 9 spot, we have the moon. Aw, the idea of a moon with a little baby brother or sister is just so cute. Well, as silly as this may sound, it's a real theory. Apparently, it's been known by its intranet name, the Moon. I like it. To the point. Clear cut. I get it. The Moon has a few other names. The sub-moon, the moonitos, personal favorite of mine, grand moons, and moonettes, to name a few. So anyways, it hasn't technically been discovered yet, but in theory, it is possible apparently. One day we shall discover the moonitos, aka moon, and it shall be a good day for mankind. In our number 8 spot, we have space pasta. Apparently, it has been discovered that the strongest substance in the universe is something called nuclear pasta. Nuclear pasta is protons and neutrons in a star's shriveled husk. It is formed from what is left of a dead star. It has crazy gravitational pressure, which squeezes the protons and neutrons into linguine-like tangles of material. Hence the pasta name. Gosh, I hate when unedible things are named after food. It's just wrong. Hearing them just makes me hungry and it sucks. But anyways, thinking of a leftover star forming to create a sort of space pasta is pretty cool. I feel like that could be the premise of a fun children's book. If you turn this into a book, I don't care about the copyright rights, just dedicate the book to me and thank me for being an idea guy. In our number 7 spot, we have Tabbys Star. A star has been found, but this isn't any normal star. This is a star that apparently dips in and out of brightness at irregular intervals and for unusual lengths of time, apparently up to a 22% dimming in brightness. The Tabbys Star was discovered by astronomer Tabitha Boyajian of Louisiana State University. People have debated over what the heck is going on here. Why is it dimming so much? And some of the theories I am definitely on board for, like the idea of an alien megastructure. What a cool thought. The most popular theory is that it's really just a large ring of dust that's causing the dimming. Nah, that theory sucks. Alien megastructure for the win. In our number 6 spot, we have infrared light. Astronomers have discovered that there is a long stream of infrared light coming from what is known as a neutron star, which is basically dense objects formed after the death of a regular star. But get this, the infrared light is coming from 800 light years away. I know this may not mean anything to you if you don't know much about space, but from what I've gathered, this is something that has never been observed before. Yet again, the only operating theory is that it's just dust surrounding the star, but no one really knows. It's crazy to think that neutron stars are constantly emitting high energy radiation comparable to X-rays, and that this one traveled 800 light years. It makes you think about how that could possibly affect us and what we don't know that we don't know. In our number 5 spot, we have rogue planets. Rogue planets are basically baby planets that have been flung away from their parent star due to gravitational forces. There is one that has been found that is known as, well, are you ready? Because this one's a mouthful. SIMP J013656663 plus 0933473. Wow. Couldn't they have just given it a fun name like Melissa? I should write to them. Or they could even use my last name because I made it up, so there's no other star or person like it. NASA, you have my permission. Melody may be given to a star phenomena. You're welcome. Anyways, SIMP J plus 15 numbers is apparently considered a rogue planet object that's 200 light years away, and the magnetic force and the magnetic field is supposedly more than 200 times stronger than Jupiter's. A strong force can make flashing auras, and this can be seen with radio telescopes. In our number 4 spot, we have the moon Hyperion. A lot of astronomers have said that the weirdest moon that has been discovered so far is Jupiter's moon, which is called Hyperion. Hyperion is truly a weird shape, not quite round like our moon, and it's full of craters. It looks like a rock that you might find on the beach that you throw into the water because it doesn't look as pretty as the more colorful rock. Am I right, or am I right, or am I right? Apparently it has a very chaotic rotation. Its axis of rotation apparently wobbles so much that its orientation in space is unpredictable. It is also known to be composed largely of water ice. Only a small amount of it is actually rock. Interesting. In our number 3 spot, we have high energy neutrino. NASA's Fermi telescope helped astronomers discover something miraculous on September 22nd, 2017. They identified a monster black hole in a far-off galaxy as the source of a high-energy neutrino that was projected at this planet, planet Earth, and seen by the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory. Apparently it hit the Antarctic ice with energy of about 300 trillion electron volts. For perspective, that is more than 45 times the energy achievable by the most powerful particle accelerator on Earth. Well, to think that this had no effect on humanity at all would be a serious lack of understanding how everything in life affects one another. To know that the gravitational pull of the moon affects the tides in the ocean is to know that this energy strike absolutely affected us somehow, whether we understand it or not. I scrolled back and saw that I did get my Reiki license that day, so no wonder I feel magic in my blood. It was the neutrino particles from galaxies away. Even though it hit Antarctica and not Canada, but we're on the same planet, so whatever, it fits my narrative and I'm sticking to it. Coming up in our number 2 spot, we have a strange galaxy. In 2016, astronomers discovered a new galaxy that was called an ultra-diffuse galaxy because it's as big as a galaxy like the Milky Way, but its stars are spread out thinly. It was called the DG-SAT-1. It is strange because unlike most other galaxies, this one was sitting all alone. It was a loner. Others are typically found in clusters. It has also been said that it seems to be an object formed in a different era of the universe, approximately 1 billion or so years after the Big Bang. Some think DG-SAT is a living fossil. Interesting. In our number 1 spot today, we have the cosmic cliffs of the Karina Nebula. In a very recent broadcast at NASA headquarters, NASA released new photos from the James Webb Space Telescope that has helped astrologers gather data that they never had before. There was one picture in particular that was of the cosmic cliffs of the Karina Nebula. With this picture, astronomers were able to see brand new stars that were completely hidden before. The host spoke about how by looking at the photo you get a sense of depth and texture. They also discovered over 100 or more new stars, bubbles and cavities and jets that are being blown out by these newborn stars, galaxies, lurking in the background of this picture. They saw structures that have never been seen before that have left them puzzled as well. The cliffs of Karina Nebula are extremely strange but beautiful to look at.
Coming in at number 10 is Vladimir Komarov. Vladimir Komarov was the first astronaut who died directly in space. This was the first mission of the Soviet Soyuz 1 spacecraft on the 23rd of April 1967. Komarov was supposed to test the ship name in manned mode and conduct the world's first docking in space with another Soyuz 2 spacecraft. However, the plan never succeeded and Komarov became the first astronaut lost in space. After the launch of the Soyuz 1 spacecraft into orbit, one of the 2 solar panels did not open and the spacecraft began to lack electricity for the correct system operations. Komarov tried to open the panel by spinning the ship around its axis, but this did not help. Due to the malfunction, the launch of Soyuz 2 was cancelled and the flight of Soyuz 1 was terminated ahead of schedule. The spacecraft successfully deorbited, but after re-entry for unknown reasons, the parachute system failed. As a result, the descent vehicle hit the ground at a fast speed, which resulted in the astronaut's instant death. As a result, the parachute system was modified and the shortcomings were eliminated. Number 9. Hylian myth. Even though Komarov's death is considered to be the starting point of space travel deaths, there is a myth that he was not the first astronaut lost in space. An American science fiction writer, Robert Hylian, claimed that a similar incident took place even before Gagarin's flight into space. On May 15, 1990, the USSR launched the Vostok 1 1KP prototype into orbit. The goal was to test the altitude control systems and the declaration engine to make sure that the ship was able to go into a descent path on the MCC command. However, the flight ended in failure. 1KP rose to a higher orbit and got stuck there for many years. Allegedly, the ship did not have life support systems, but many believed it was manned. The Western press wrote that the pilot, Gennady Zavadovsky, was on board. Such a person really existed, but at that time he was not part of the Soviet astronaut team, and Hylian claimed that Soviet citizens told him about the astronaut during his visit to USSR. However, I cannot, in all fairness, prove the myth by adding this alleged death to the question of has anyone been lost in space. Number 8. Clifton Williams. Clifton Williams was an American naval aviator, test pilot, mechanical engineer, major in the US Marine Corps, and a NASA astronaut who was killed in a plane crash. To be clear, he never went into space, but this was part of the space program. The crash was caused by a mechanical failure to a NASA T-38 jet trainer, which he was piloting to visit his parents in Mobile, Alabama. The failure caused the flight controls to stop responding, and although he activated the ejection seat, it did not save him. The aircraft crashed in Florida near Tallahassee within an hour of departing Patrick AFB. Number 7. X15 Flight 191. During X15 Flight 191 on November 15, 1967, Michael J. Adams had his 7th flight and the plane had an electrical problem followed by control problems at the apogee of its flight. Adams was an American aviator, aeronautical engineer, and USAF astronaut. He was one of the 12 pilots who flew the North American X-15, an experimental space plane jointly operated by the Air Force and NASA. On November 15, 1967, Adams flew X-15 Flight 191, also known as X-15 Flight 366 6597 aboard the X15 III, one of the 3 planes that X15 had in its fleet. Flying to an altitude above 50 miles, Adams qualified as an astronaut, according to the United States definition of the boundary of space. Moments later, the aircraft broke apart, killing Adams and destroying the X15 III. He was the first American space mission fatality by the American Convention. Number 6. Apollo 1. Apollo 1, initially designed as AS-204, was intended to be the first crewed mission of the Apollo program, the American undertaking to land the first man on the moon. It was planned to launch on February 21st, 1967, as the first low Earth orbital test of the Apollo Command and Service Module. During a plugs-out test of the Apollo hardware, which its first version could be charitably described as a flying turd, a combination of factors including overpressure, pure oxygen environment, an egress hatch that opened inward, and excessive Velcro and other flammable material, plus a spark from somewhere under the astronauts' couches, caused a cabin fire. This happened during a launch rehearsal test at Cape Kennedy Air Force Station Launch Complex 34 on January 27th, and it killed all 3 crew members. 3 astronauts were killed, likely by inhalation of toxic fumes from the Velcro burning quickly. Number 5. Soyuz 11. Vlad Vlokov, Gregory Dubrovsky, and Viktor Palsov all died in space during the Soyuz 11 mission on June 30th, 1971. The astronaut crew successfully docked with the Salyut 1 orbital station and began its reactivation. On the 11th day of the mission, a fire broke out in the station, so it had to be abandoned. On June 29th, Soyuz 11 successfully undocked and began deorbiting. However, shortly after the separation from the ship, communication with the astronaut crew was interrupted. The descent vehicle landed successfully in the assigned area, but the rescue team found the astronauts dead. It was found that the astronaut death occurred as a result of depressurization and abrupt onset of decompression sickness. The astronauts tried to eliminate the air leak, however, in the extreme conditions of the fog that filled the cabin after depressurization, severe pain throughout the body, and loss of hearing due to burst eardrums, the astronauts did not immediately establish the cause of the leak and simply did not have enough time to save themselves. Number 4. Valentin Bonarenko. Valentin Bonarenko was a Soviet fighter pilot selected in 1960 for training as a cosmonaut. During a 15-day endurance experiment in a low-pressure altitude chamber with at least 50% oxygen atmosphere, Bonero, having completed work for the day, removed monitoring biosensors from his body and washed his skin with an alcohol-soaked cotton ball, which he then discarded. The cotton ball landed on an electric hot plate, which he was using to brew a cup of tea. The cotton ignited, and Bonarenko tried to smother the flames with the sleeve of his woolen coveralls, which caught fire in the chamber's oxygen-rich atmosphere. Because of the pressure difference, it took a watching doctor nearly half an hour to open the chamber door. Bonarenko's clothing was burned until almost all the oxygen in the chamber was used up, and he had suffered third-degree burns over most of his body. The attending physician at Botkin Hospital, surgeon and traumatologist Vladimir Golahowski, recalled in 1984 that while attempting to start an intravenous drip, the only blood vessels he could find for inserting a needle were on the soles of his feet, where his flight boots had warded off the flames. The Soviet government concealed the death along with Bonarenko's membership of the Cosmonaut Corps until 1880, and a crater on the moon's far side is now named after him. Number 3. Columbia Space Shuttle Crash. On the 1st of February 2003, the second space shuttle crash occurred. Shuttle Columbia was returning to Earth after 16 days of flight. Approximately 16 minutes before the expected landing, communication with the crew was interrupted. Eyewitnesses filmed the burning wreckage of the shuttle flying at an altitude of about 63 kilometers. All 7 astronauts were lost in space. They were Rick Husband, William C. McCool, Elon Ramon, Michael P. Anderson, Kampla Chawla, David M. Brown, and Laurel Clark. As the investigation showed, the cause of the disaster was a breakdown that arose back at the start. About 82 seconds into the flight, a piece of insulation detached from the left fairing, which struck the carbon fiber panel of the Columbia's left wing and probably left a hole in the thermal insulation layer. Because of this, after entering the dense layers of the atmosphere, the leading edge of the left wing began to heat up more than usual, and the wing began to collapse, and after it, the shuttle itself collapsed. Notably, incidents with detached pieces of thermal insulation from the shuttles were observed before, but test shows that they do not pose a threat to the astronauts. Losing Columbia became a turning point in the space Shuttle program, and the shuttle astronaut flights were interrupted for several years, and in 2011 the program was finally closed due to the high risk of astronauts' lives. Number 2. Spaceship II. On October 31st, 2014, another astronaut was lost in space. It was Michael Ellsbury, the pilot of the suborbital spacecraft Spaceship II of Virgin Galactic. During the 55th test flight of the ship, serious anomalies were discovered, which led to the spacecraft crash. The cause was called crew error. The pilots unblocked the tail section of the vehicle ahead of time without gaining the necessary speed, and also did not perform the necessary actions to transfer the tail section to a vertical position. As a result, the ship began to rotate around its axis and then fell apart. The wreckage was scattered all over a radius of 8 kilometers. First pilot Michael Ellsbury was killed, but co-pilot Peter Sebold managed to eject. The pilot astronaut survived but was seriously injured. Fortunately, the failure did not become fatal for the Richard Branson Company. Virgin Galactic worked out its bugs, and in July 2021 carried out the first ever suborbital tourist spaceflight, ushering the area of space tourism. And coming in at number 1 is the Space Shuttle Challenger. In the 1980s, the era of space shuttles began, which finally established US supremacy in space. These were reusable rocket planes that made a real revolution in space tech, but still were not without significant shortcomings, which eventually became the cause of the biggest space travel disasters. Due to scheduling issues with what had been called GO fever, STS-51L launched in suboptimal temperatures on January 28, 1986. The cold weather weakened the O-rings that sealed each section of the tall, white solid rocket booster segments and prevented the exhaust gases from shooting out of any direction but down. The seals failed over approximately 26 degrees of the arc on the starboard side of the SRB in the lowest of 4 segment joints. Exhaust flames escaped through the breach, pushing the SRB into the large rust-colored external tank. The starboard off strut then connected the SRB to the ET, was pushed into the hydrogen tank, which shot up through the intertank into the oxygen tank. This destroyed the ET structure entirely. The orbiter survived this event, but because of its orientation to the free flow aerodynamic forces, quickly disintegrated the orbiter. The crew compartment survived the breakup, and when recovered, it was discovered that several switches had been moved from their launch normal positions, indicating that the crew was conscious for some time after the breakup and tried to recover. The crew compartment impacted the ocean surface at a terminal velocity which was far too fast to survive, and all 7 members of the crew passed away. These members were F. Richard Scorby, Michael J. Smith, Ronald McNair, Elson Orzinka, Judith Resnick, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McClough. To this day, it is still unknown whether the astronauts were conscious at the time of impact, although it's judged unlikely.
In our number 7 spot, we have enormous babies. There have been many reports from NASA employees of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin seeing aliens when they first arrived on the moon. Even though Buzz and Neil deny it, I'm sure they have been told to deny it, if you know what I mean. A former NASA employee by the name of Otto Binder bypassed NASA's broadcasting and picked up the following being said. NASA, what's there, Apollo 11? Response, these babies are huge, sir. Enormous. Oh my god. You wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out there, lined up on the far side of the crater edge. They're on the moon watching us. Apparently, off the record, the astronauts have admitted to many scientists that they did indeed see something. Yeah, I believe it. It's silly to think that there is nothing out there. That's just, human ego, I think, to believe that we are the only intelligent life. That mixed with human fear. In our number 3 spot, we have the cylindrical object. Allegedly in 1991, a cosmonaut by the name of Musa Menarov caught a cylindrical object on film that he believed to be a UFO. The object was shiny, and in the film it swivels and flies across space. Originally, Musa thought it was something off the ship, but then after further investigation, nothing was missing from the ship. So after further reflection on seeing it and, looking back at the footage, he's convinced it was some kind of UFO ship or a UFO device. What's with all the UFO objects that are so shiny? Do you think this is a UFO? Or perhaps is it something from another planet? Let us know in the comment section below. Coming up in our number 2 spot, we have the mystery hut. The ending to this made me lol so hard that I had to include it. A mystery hut was discovered by China's astronauts and people operating their U-2 moon rover. This rover was making its way through the northwestern part of the moon when it was discovered. On the camera, a cube-shaped mystery hut was captured. This was only in November of 2021. It created a spectacle. Had moon people finally been discovered? Everyone was asking themselves. By January 2022, the rover was much closer, and what did it find? Oh, just a small piece of space rock on a crater rim. The drama. Ooh, look, a mystery hut. Probably the moon men reside there. 1 month later. Alas, it is a rock. Humans are funny.
Number 10. Low gravity doesn't affect your bones and muscles. We know that humans do just fine in Earth's gravity. On the other hand, we know that human bones and muscles can atrophy terribly in zero gravity, as seen in experiments on the International Space Station. Astronauts on the ISS have to exercise for 2 hours a day to prevent muscle loss, but their bones still lose calcium over time, and they don't recover until they come back to Earth. Adding to this, we don't know how the human body will react on Mars, where gravity is only about 0.38 the strength of Earth. Many people have long assumed that humans can survive just fine in Martian gravity. It'll be just like Earth, only we can jump a little higher, but we don't actually know this for a fact. It might turn out that low Martian gravity is just as bad for human health as zero gravity. Mars's low gravity may also erode other capabilities that are crucial for everyday functioning. For instance, NASA has found that eyesight can mysteriously deteriorate in zero gravity. Astronaut John Phillips went from a perfect 20/20 to 2100 after just 6 months aboard the ISS. Astronauts also find it harder to sleep in zero gravity, and many passengers in space suffer from insomnia. Number 9. Space Shuttle Challenger astronauts died instantly. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds into its flight and ended the lives of all 7 crew members instantly. The spacecraft disintegrated 46,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Cape Canaveral, Florida at 11:39 a.m. It was the first fatal accident involving an American spacecraft in flight. It was thought that all the astronauts passed away instantly, but it was revealed decades later that some, if not all of the astronauts survived the initial explosion, as the cockpit cabin had enough protection to not be breached. For 2 minutes and 45 seconds, they were awake and aware as they plummeted towards the Atlantic Ocean, which is terrifying. Understandably, NASA knew that the news of their terrifying death would have crippled this space program even more than it already was, so they kept this a secret. I'm gonna be honest, I do understand the reasoning for this, but it's just sad. Number 8. The sun is a big ball of fire. Okay, so this isn't all NASA's fault, but despite what you've been led to believe, the sun is not a ball of fire. There isn't any fire in the sun. Fire requires oxygen, and the sun is composed mostly of helium and hydrogen. In fact, the heat from the sun comes from something called nuclear fusion. The pressure and temperature in the sun's core causes the hydrogen atoms to fuse together into helium atoms. This process gives off the intense heat and light of the sun. People, including scientists, sometimes say that the sun burns hydrogen to make it glow, but that is just a figure of speech. Hydrogen really doesn't burn, it fuses into helium. Also, the sun itself is white, which means it contains all the colors in the visible spectrum. The sun appears orangish yellow because of the blue light it emits has a shorter wavelength and is scattered in the atmosphere, which is the same process that makes the sky appear blue. Number 7. Mars is the only other habitable planet. It's been said that Mars is the only other habitable planet, but that's not true. Kepler 186f is the first rocky exoplanet to be found within the habitable zone, as the region around the host star has the temperature that is right for liquid water. This planet is also very close in size to Earth. While planets have previously been found in the habitable zone, they are at least 40% larger in size than Earth, and understanding their makeup is challenging. Kepler 186f is more reminiscent of Earth. Although the size
Kepler 186f is known, its mass and composition are not. Previous research, however, suggests that a planet the size of Kepler 186f is likely to be rocky. Even though we may not find out about what's going on at the surface of this planet anytime soon, it's a strong reminder of why new technologies are being developed that will enable scientists to get a closer look at distant worlds, but we still have a lot to learn. So maybe one day the human race will be living on Kepler 186f. Number 6. Your rocket won't blow up before leaving Earth. Yeah, your rocket can actually explode before you even leave Earth. For example, Elon Musk's plan to go to Mars involves strapping a giant spaceship atop the biggest rocket that humanity has ever built. Because any rocket launch basically involves a long, controlled explosion, no matter how many safety tests are done beforehand, there is always a risk. If anything goes wrong, if the explosion gets out of control, the people strapped in that big container of fuel don't stand a chance. For context, NASA's Space Shuttle program carried 833 passengers between 1981 and 2011. Of those, 14 people died in explosions in 2 high-profile accidents, a fatality rate of 1.6%. That's more dangerous than driving, and it's even a bit riskier than climbing Mount Everest. Some of SpaceX's smaller Falcon 9 rockets have either exploded on the launch pad or blown up mid-flight as well, so safe to say getting to space is just as dangerous as being there. Number 5. Extended space travel doesn't affect DNA. It's not true. Astronaut Scott Kelly, who spent a year at the International Space Station in 2016, returned to find out that he was 2 inches taller than his departing height. The new physical differences between Scott and his identical twin brother, Mike, also an astronaut, were startling. Scientists compared the DNA of the two and found that besides growing 2 inches, Scott's gut bacteria were completely different and his gene expression had changed. Scientists concluded that the changes were caused by the stresses of space travel, which can cause changes in a cell's biological pathways. Although Scott eventually returned to his original height, his other genetic changes are seemingly irreversible, meaning Scott and his brother are no longer identical twins, which is insane. Number 4. You can only see the Great Wall of China from space. It's been said that the only man-made structure you can see from space is the Great Wall of China, but the visible wall theory was shaken after China's own astronaut, Yang Lui, said he couldn't see the historic structure. There was even talk about rewriting textbooks that supported the theory, a formidable task in Earth's most populous nation. The issue surfaced again after photos taken by Leroy Chiao from the International Space Station were determined to show small sections of the wall in Inner Mongolia about 200 miles north of Beijing. A photo was taken of it, but it wasn't the only thing seen. For years it's been said that the Great Wall of China is the only structure to be seen from space, but that isn't true. From the ISS about 250 miles up, you can see the Great Wall along with numerous other man-made structures, but it's definitely not the most visible imprint of man on our planet. Number 3. Space isn't dangerous. We all know that accidents happen and things can go wrong, but it seems like NASA never told their astronauts how bad things could get. Astronaut Scott Perinsky had to install a new module on the ISS that would serve as a node for the addition of future research laboratories. Part of the mission required changing the location of an array of solar panels. Things were going along really well until the crew inside commanded these large solar panels to extend. They got jammed up and the panels began to tear. It was unsafe to continue to extend this panel any further, and you couldn't retract it either. There was concern that if the astronauts even tried to undock the space shuttle, it might rip apart and hit the shuttle. After 72 hours of grueling work on the ground, NASA came up with a plan. Scott would have to travel further away from safety of an airlock than had ever been previously attempted. It wasn't only the distance that was nerve-wracking, as Scott explained, there was a real danger that we could do even worse damage to the space station. Then there was the potential risk to myself, because if there was any metal-to-metal connection with the solar panel or arcing, it could actually electrocute me or cause ignition in the 100% oxygen in my suit. All the tools I was working with had to be specially insulated. The metal parts of my spacesuit had to be wrapped in special tape, he said. Thankfully, everything worked out and the mission was a success. Scott has said, "I still to this day think it's one of NASA's greatest accomplishments, but it's crazy that he had to go through that." Number 2. There's no life on the moon. When astronaut Neil Armstrong took a walk on the moon and became the first man to do so in 1969, many conspiracy theories came to light. For one, people claimed he didn't actually go to the moon and that the footage was recorded in a studio. Of the many conspiracy theories surrounding this moment, there's one that remains a mystery to date. During the Apollo 11 mission, after Neil landed on the moon, NASA claims to have lost transmission for roughly 2 minutes. And in a reportedly secret message to NASA, Neil said, "These babies were huge, sir. Enormous. Oh god, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecrafts out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." Yep, seems like Neil encountered some aliens, and I'm sure they never prepared him for that. And coming in at number 1 is the effects space has on you emotionally. Being in space is scary. Your safety is at risk both physically and emotionally. Astronaut Chris Hadfield said sometimes we hear pings as tiny rocks hit our spaceship, and also the creaks and snaps of expanding metal as we go in and out of sunlight. The solar panels are full with tiny holes from the micrometeorites. I watched a large meteorite burn up between me and Australia, and to think that the hypersonic dumb lump of rock randomly hurtling into us instead sent a shiver up my back. Besides that, going into space can cause a lot of psychological issues like anxiety or depression. When actor William Shatner went up to space, he said this of his experience: "Everything I had thought was wrong. Everything I had expected to see was wrong. I had thought that going into space would be the ultimate catharsis of that connection I had been looking for between all living things, that being up there would be the next beautiful step to understanding the harmony of the universe. I discovered that the beauty isn't out there, it's down here with all of us. Leaving that behind made my connection to our tiny planet even more profound. It was among the strongest feelings of grief I have ever encountered. The contrast between the vicious coldness of space and the warm nurturing of Earth below me filled with overwhelming sadness. I learned later that I was not alone in this feeling. It is called the overview effect and is not uncommon among astronauts, including Yuri Gagarin, Michael Collins, Sally Ride, and many others. Essentially, when someone travels to space and views Earth from orbit, a sense of the planet's fragility takes hold. I cannot imagine the feelings of experiencing this, and it honestly sounds traumatizing.
We're going to start off the list with a very spooky piece of audio picked up during the Apollo 10 mission in 1969. But before you hear it, just going to give you a little preamble. The team was orbiting the moon testing various equipment when Gene Cernan, piloting the lunar module, heard something strange. It was an eerie, whistling, whooshing kind of sound. He asked 2 of his fellow astronauts, John Young and Tom Stafford, if they heard it as well. They all agreed it was a strange noise, saying how it sounded spacey, like space music. So give it a listen.
You hear that whistling sound?
Definitely a creepy thing to hear while floating around in the vastness of space. As if floating around in the vastness of space isn't freaky enough as it is. What do you think of this though? Is it just some kind of technological feedback? Could aliens have been communicating with them? Share your thoughts down below. And don't forget, while you're sharing those thoughts, to like and subscribe as well. We got videos coming at you on the daily. Next up, we have the Cosmos 1408 accident. The Cosmos 1408 is a Russian satellite, or more accurately, it was a Soviet Union satellite launched in 1982 that operated for a couple years before becoming inactive. It was still floating around in orbit up until 2021, when it was destroyed by a Russian anti-satellite weapon test. But the thing is, the obliteration of this satellite caused this mass of space debris that posed a real threat to the International Space Station. At the time of this incident, there were 7 crew aboard the ISS, and this cloud of debris was flying through orbit above the ISS, intersecting with its orbit every 93 minutes. There was a real danger here, a bunch of space junk colliding with a space station, not terribly safe. So Mission Control contacted the crew, told them, you guys gotta put your spacesuits on and take shelter in the escape crew capsules just in case the debris smashes into the station. Now, everything turned out to be fine, and at this point there are only about 300 pieces of the initial 1800 still in orbit, but still, this would have been quite a fright. Pieces of an exploded satellite might smash into the station, guys, so throw on your spacesuits, hop in the escape pods, and hope for the best. Next on the list, we have a series of strange lights spotted by astronaut Leroy Chiao. In 2005, Leroy Chiao, the commander of the International Space Station, saw something pretty incredible during a spacewalk. It was a pretty routine day. He was working outside the ISS doing whatever it is astronauts do up there when he noticed a formation of lights. He described the lights as being arranged in a line and compared the formation to like almost an upside down check mark. They seemed to be a structured and deliberate arrangement of lights rather than random or natural phenomena. So what were these lights? Was it reflections from debris, aliens? Well, there's no concrete evidence, but one thing is for sure, it wasn't just his mind playing tricks on him because the rest of the crew saw the lights as well. Next up, we have the Alan Bean sighting. Alan Bean, a NASA astronaut, reported seeing something oddly shiny on the moon, something he described looking like shoe leather. What could this shiny thing have been? Bean suggested it might have been similar to glass, but really had no idea. Ever since he mentioned this, people have taken the shiny object idea and like really ran with it, talking about possible leftovers from alien technology on the moon or something like that. Really, there's no solid explanation for what he saw. The term shoe leather doesn't exactly clarify what this shiny object could have been. Was it a reflection of something, a natural element? Could have been human-made material left behind as well. Next, we have the UFO. During the Apollo 16 mission, astronauts John Young, Thomas Mattingly, and Charles Duke were heading back from the moon when they filmed about 4 seconds of footage. In the video, there's a saucer-like object floating above the lunar surface. It looks like your classic UFO, the type you'd see in a 50s B movie or something. Footage was taken from a 16mm motion picture camera shooting at 12 frames per second from the window of the command service module. Now, they didn't realize what they'd captured on camera until after the mission, otherwise they'd have probably lost control of the vessel. It's one thing to think you saw something weird in the sky when your feet are like firmly planted on the ground, on Earth, but seeing one while you're floating through space, that would be a whole other story. You're in their territory. Some of you may not know this, but it's not just human beings that have left Earth's atmosphere. There are tons of animals that have been launched into space, and many of them never made it back. So there are a number of US and Soviet ships still floating in orbit, the remains of dogs and chimps still inside of them, and some of them are said to still be seen time to time. These animals being sent up into space was referred to by NASA as the Albert Project. The Soviet and US governments were putting all they had into the space race. It was one of the most intense competitions in history, it has to be, and because there was so much on the line and sending human beings up into space without having worked out all the kinks was pretty dangerous, they decided to send up animals first instead. Albert was the name given to several chimps used in these experiments. These missions were to study the effects of space travel on living things, focusing on issues like weightlessness and the impact of high-speed launches and re-entries. Sucks that a bunch of animals had to die, but it really did help move the technology forward. Next up, we have the Soyuz MS-10 launch. This would have been a pretty scary incident. So on October 11th of 2018, a spacecraft launched carrying 2 crew members, Russian cosmonaut Alexei Ovchinin and NASA astronaut Nick Hague, to the International Space Station. But just over 2 minutes into the flight, the crew reported feeling weightless. Turned out there was a booster separation issue. The rocket's first and second stages separated during the ascent to propel the spacecraft into orbit, but one of the 4 boosters failed to detach properly, so the spacecraft's launch escape system was activated. I never want to be in space and hear escape system activated. That is freaky. This system is designed to rapidly propel the crew capsule away from the rocket in the event of a launch malfunction. Fortunately, It worked, and the Soyuz MS-10 capsule was separated from the malfunctioning rocket. The capsule then made its descent, but at a much steeper trajectory than a normal landing, so the crew actually experienced about 7 times Earth's gravity on the way down. Imagine how insane that would feel, especially after having just felt weightless. Now you have 7 times Earth gravity pressing down on you. That's a pretty extreme contrast. But after the descent, the capsule touched down safely in a designated landing area in Kazakhstan, and both crew members emerged from the capsule unharmed. Up next, we have ammonia leaks. Ammonia is an important substance used in the International Space Station's cooling systems. These systems are responsible for maintaining the right temperature within the station to make sure equipment and systems operate properly. Ammonia is circulated through a series of pipes and radiators to help dissipate excess heat that gets generated by the components of the craft. But sometimes there can be issues with leakage. This is obviously a risk. The main concern with ammonia is that it can freeze into small ice particles in the vacuum of space, which could damage parts of the station. In 2013, there was an ammonia leak on the ISS. Astronauts detected small white flakes of ammonia outside the station during a routine spacewalk. There was a faulty pump module, so astronauts had to walk outside the station and remove and replace it. Pretty scary situation, but the repairs were successful. Next up, we have the discovery of a pretty volatile substance known as moon dust. So moon dust, or lunar regolith, is this fine, powdery stuff all over the moon's surface. It's made of tiny particles smashed together by meteoroids over tons and tons of years, but don't let the word dust fool you into thinking the worst thing it can do is make you sneeze. This is not a harmless substance. Moon dust is sharp, rough, highly reactive because the moon doesn't have weathering like we do here. This dust sticks to gear, and that's bad news for spacesuits, spacecraft, and machinery. You know, it's rough and it gets everywhere. I hate moon dust. Breathing or eating this dust would be deadly. It messes with your breathing, can cause severe health problems. So this lunar dust can be a pain for equipment, causing potential breakdowns. And back in the Apollo missions, astronauts had problems with moon dust sticking to their spacesuits, and there were worries about potential health risks in the long term. It wasn't already abundantly clear based on all the space docs and movies out there, space is a very volatile place. Finally, we have the challenges of lower gravity in space, more specifically the negative effects it has on astronauts' bodies. I always wanted to experience weightlessness, basically like flying, really floating, really, but it looks fun. I'd imagine though it'd be very nauseating after a while. Well, there are a number of negative side effects of weightlessness in space, aside from just an upset stomach. First, the lack of resistance that Earth's gravity puts on us on a constant basis can lead to muscle atrophy. The muscles that aren't actively used, especially the ones that support posture and body weight on Earth, can weaken and decrease in size. Then you have bone problems. On Earth, bones undergo constant stress, also because of gravity. This helps maintain bone density. And microgravity, the lack of stress on bones, can lead to a loss of bone density, making them more prone to fractures and weakening. Fluids in the body tend to shift towards the upper body and head in microgravity. This can actually affect the cardiovascular system in a negative way. Some astronauts have even reported changes in vision during and after extended stays in space. Weightlessness also seems to affect the immune system, making astronauts more susceptible to infections. Scientists still aren't 100% sure why that is, though. And then, of course, there's just the psychological effects for a prolonged time out in space. It doesn't just relate to the lack of gravity, but everything. Feelings of isolation, stress, working in a confined space, out in space, as far away from the rest of the world as you can get. Sounds kind of nice, but I think it would be pretty trippy after a while. Once again, I tip my hat. And with all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.